Stay humble and stay hungry. Staying humble and remembering who you are. Staying hungry and chasing after every single thing the Lord has for you. Because remember, he's giving you this responsibility. And I promise you, he can take it away just as quick.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to this Wednesday episode of A Call to Leadership. I'm Dr. Nate Saul, your host. And today is a very special day because I get to interview a friend who is a true walking miracle star, the real life star, if you will, of the movie Breakthrough, a 2019 American Christian drama film based on the true story of John Smith. Now, John was a teenager who fell through the ice in a lake and was declared dead, yet his mother came into the hospital room to give her last words. This is a true story, and we're going to talk with John, my wingman and I, Joe Thompson, today about his journey. John, so good to have you on the show today. I'm so glad to have you. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Joe, wingman.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, man. We're going to do this.
Thanks for the invite.
John, you know, we've been friends and family. I've been part of your family's story for many years and had your mom on the show, had your brother on the show. I'm like, well, got to have the star of the show on the show. Now your mom's gonna be like, who's the real star here? I don't know how many times you've told your story. I'm sure it's countless times. And it's partly because you have an incredible story. And of course, we know, God's at the center of that story. But I think a great way to start is to just share a little bit about your background as we unfold aspects of your life, and ultimately as it fits into the leadership story. Leadership in your life, leadership and how you're leading others, and your trajectory. So let's just start with some basics. Where were you born? Tell me. Start at the beginning.
So I was born in a little town in Mexico City, Guatemala. I believe it is northwest of Guatemala City, the capital. I was put up for adoption at 5 months, and then my parents, Brian and Joyce Smith, adopted me, brought me back to St. Charles, Missouri, where I grew up in the same house for 20 years. Same cul-de-sac, same tilted slope down the street, same room, same everything. Went to the local Gingham's and Bob Evans all around here. Basically a St. Charles boy. I just tell people at this point that I was born and raised in Missouri. So. Yeah, that's awesome. So when you were growing up, normal family life, and actually, I'm glad you shared that you were adopted, because some folks that are listening right now, we've had some conversations in the past on some of our episodes about taking kids in and helping kids that need a family and a home. Is that still happening in Guatemala? Do you know if that's still happening? I'm not 100% sure. That's kind of on my bucket list to kind of dig deeper into that, seeing what I can do to help, my country. I do know of a good amount of adoptees that are around my age or a little bit younger. As far as if that's still open, I am not 100% sure.
Have you ever considered going to Guatemala?
Well, actually, there's been a lot of talk of that between Pastor Jason and myself. Just doing a trip, just kind of seeing where, maybe not going to Mexico City, Guatemala. From my understanding, and we heard this from a missionary a couple years ago at a conference, that where I grew up, you can't go in the daylight. Like, you need an armed guard to walk with you. And if you're a woman, then you need multiple guards. Like, it is a very, very dangerous place to be at. Missionaries and people of the faith don't often get up there with how rough it is. So just kind of hearing that just kind of makes the miracle a little bit more special, seeing that God brought me out of all of that. But I definitely want to get back and just kind of see what it's like.
No, I understand that. You grew up, you feel like your upbringing was pretty normal?
Very normal.
Yeah.
It was a little different. My mom was 50 when she adopted me. So it was a little weird having, parents at a grandparent's age. My oldest brother is 53, and then my youngest brother's 51, and then I'm 22. So it's a little bit different. I mean, you've met my brother. He looks like Santa Claus. So he's got the big old beard and, the overalls. He's a country boy. And so it was just a little bit odd, my friends having siblings. My wife, as a matter of fact, has all younger siblings. And it's just weird with that family dynamic. But I wouldn't change it at all.
Yeah, man. Well, I I've actually, I'm getting ready to turn 49. And I thought we were looking to have another child or adopt for a while, probably over the last 10 years. And it just didn't work out for us. But I would tell my wife at this stage, I don't know how other parents are, but I would imagine that second or third child, when it's further down the line, maybe you're not as strict, or maybe things are just a little looser, right? Because you're getting older and maybe you're not as wound tight. I don't know if that's always the case with parents because everybody's different, but I would imagine you probably got a few more passes than your brother.
My older brother, Tom, will sit at every family event and just spread how easy my life was compared to his. He will not like hold back on my mom or me or anybody on how rough his life is and how easy mine was. So very much so. My parents' biggest thing that looking back on it, that I'm really thankful for was the amount of respect that they engraved in me. You know, being polite, doing the right thing. You know, I can remember to this day, and I even tell it to my son who's barely 6 months old. It's yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, please and thank you. And I had to like say that to my parents before I left the room. And it was before I left the house to go to a friend's, before, you know, I went to school, you know, just engraving that I was polite, that I would do the right thing. And more importantly, I'd represent Christ the best way I could. So, and I really, looking back on it now and seeing the world we're in now, I'm very, very thankful for that.
Yeah, because I mean, have we lost that? I mean, I want to go back because this is really important. I mean, how much kindness are we showing to one another? Of course, you know, the Bible says that love is patient, love is kind, right? And I've heard it said like this, those are the two pillars of love, patience and kindness. And when we talk about respect is a form of kindness. And we live in a world to where in some ways that is the exception now rather than the norm.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy because, you know, you go back a couple years, like even I'd say my life was kind of like, my generation is kind of that end of the gap of, okay, kids were playing outside until it got like dusk. Okay, when the streetlights came on, that's when it was time for me to go home. Like I knew that. And now, like getting into my later teens were when electronics started getting more common, when like game systems were coming out, cell phones were getting more and more, you know, advanced, to where now, like you said, it's that simple kindness is just slowly gone away. And it's a weird thing that, because what is the source of it? And that's one thing that is always kind of confused me, is what is the common denominator that created that? Because everyone goes from holding a door and saying thank you to you just don't look each other in the eye now. You have your AirPods in, you just kind of ignore people. You shove someone, you just look at them weird, and then you walk on. You know, it's a different culture than it was 5-6 years ago.
Right.
Do you think there's a certain dissociation that's built over time from, you know, being in the electronic world, the gaming world, texting instead of talking, you know, playing multiplayer games instead of out playing baseball? Do you think that people are just becoming dissociated with each other, where we don't look at that like that human that's standing in front of us? We just kind of look past it.
It's funny you say that. Did any of you see the like Ready Player One, the movie, where they put that it's about a video game that this guy created, and you just put it like they have terrible lives on the outside, and they put this headset on and they can create any world they want. Like they can whatever their avatar wants to be, whatever the special terms are, you can do it. And you just go through like different scenarios, get all the money you want, all the wealth you want, like just for getting real life. And I really think that's what a lot of people are doing with the video game worlds, with electronics. You know, you put your AirPods in, you're listening to a podcast, you're not really paying attention to anything that's going on around you if you're in a grocery store. Like you're not. Hardly anybody's not wearing a pair of earbuds anymore. You know, like whatever you're listening to, you know, music, whatever, you're in your world. And if someone like hits you, I don't think so much sometimes that they're trying to be rude. I think it's more of like you're saying, they're just not there. They're going through the motions of doing what they need to do rather than kind of paying attention to what's going on in the outside world. You know, and I think that's why even in cars, you see people kind of swerving off the roads more commonly now, is people are just kind of not giving their full attention to what's in front of them, more what's coming through their ears, coming through their phones. And in turn, like you said, it's destroying relationships. Yeah. I mean, families. I mean, you just get constantly caught up in your phone, emails, business, whatever it may be, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that you're not in the present. You are not spending time with your family. You are not engaging with other people. You're not developing your mind. And I believe in a lot of cases, you just become numb to the normal and you just fall into the normality of everything else.
And there's a certain consideration that I always try to give to people. Have you ever been in a restaurant and like you get really bad service, plates kind of tossing it? That upsets a lot of people, because it's their time out. They want to have a nice night, nice meal. I always go the other direction because like this is a person, I don't know what he or she is going through. I don't know what kind of news they got that day. I don't know what their life is like. So before I, have, contempt for them in any way, the first thing I always try to do is like, this isn't like just a robot here to serve me. Like this is a living being with a soul, and I owe them that consideration. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes like solely from like my Christianity, like just believing in Jesus would want you to give that consideration to people. How do we send that message out? Like it's such a simple thing, but it like you're saying, we're getting further away from it. How do we get the message out? Like, how do we say that to people?
I think it comes down to a lot of, as fathers, as leaders, how are we representing? How are we leading? One thing that I really like, and I do it now, and my wife, no matter how tight on money we are, it's funny you bring the restaurant scene in, is I always leave a decent tip. Not because I'm any better or any worse or because I have a lot of money. It's because it's to bless them.
Yes.
They're working their butt off for, you don't know their situation. You don't know if they can barely afford groceries the next day. Who am I to be, any better, any worse than anybody else? And I think it just comes down to, what kind of leader are you? How are you leading your family? How are you leading your children? How are you leading in the business room, in the business office, through work? What are you doing that is different from the norm? And I think that's what it comes down to is, okay, I see everybody else doing this. What am I going to do that's different to change lives each day? Because I can go on and be arrogant and throw my AirPods in and ignore everybody. And if something doesn't go my way, I can throw a fit, or I can be a human. I can show grace. I can show forgiveness. It's the cliche, what would Jesus do? But in reality, I think we're not looking at that phrase anymore. It's more of, what would John do? Not what would Jesus do? What would I do? Too much I, not enough reflecting what he has given us as, a representation of it all.
It's funny you say leadership too in your family, because when we first started talking about leadership and we were like, where does that start? Like where does that leadership start? And we immediately went back to it begins in your family. Like it's going to come through your parents. And if it doesn't come through your parents, then the onus is on you, to find that mentorship or that direction to become a leader.
You got to break that generational curse.
Well, that's it. I mean, depending on how we're all influenced by our surroundings. So our environment plays a huge part in our worldview. And ultimately, those individuals who are our caretakers, our parents, whoever they might be, they play that role. And sometimes, most of the time, they make mistakes, right? We all do. And so through that, those mistakes that you're talking about, this idea of generational curses in a layman's term, it's really this perpetuation of error, right? And so, when we talk about even the word sin, the loose translation is to miss the mark, right? So it's error, missing the mark, right? And so breaking that, like my parents were divorced, and that was whatever the circumstances were, it happened. And I was committed to marrying someone who I knew, this is a person that we're going to go the distance, all things being equal. And we're going to do it with God-centered at our relationship. And that was a point of, as you talk about, breaking the generational curse, because we were going to make a change to serve one another. And that's the key, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. If we're going to look at Jesus' leadership, and it's, he's the ultimate servant leader, and also his path to greatness is through serving others, right? If anyone wants to be great, learn to serve. The one who's greatest among you is your servant. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting because you mentioned the word reflecting, and in the realm of servant leadership, as far as academically, there are a number of different behaviors or traits that, like listening, is it now it's not just servant leaders, but hallmarks of servant leadership: listening, empathy. We touched on empathy, caring about others, having compassion, having awareness. This is the reflection piece, right? Having a self-awareness. Where am I right now? That's a big question to ask. Mm-hmm. Like in this moment, like, okay, so somebody just, told me I was number one on the highway. It happens to me all the time, right? I get called number one. Where am I in this moment? Like, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Should I be repentant? Or should I just lash out in anger? And then the other part is, where are they? And that's part of that empathy. And then, of course, the healing perspective, right? Because servant leaders are also healers, because people are hurting. I mean, people are really hurting, and we see it every day. And sometimes we want to turn a blind eye to it because we're tied up in everything else, technology or all kinds of issues that we're facing. And so, I wonder what you're seeing. And boy, we need to go back. We need to go back, because let me put a pin in that one, because I want to talk about what you've seen, all right, before what you're seeing today, because you've seen some stuff. At a point in your life, how many years ago now?
7.
7 years ago, you were seeing the lights go out as you were going into a lake, a frozen lake.
Yes. So I was the boy that drowned in Lake St. Louis, Missouri. The lake was called Lake St. Louis, if you want to do your background check. Fact check me, I should say. Me and 2 of my friends were out in the ice. We were playing. We were just having, a normal day. It was 60 degrees that day, and the ice was melting, and it had cracked and it had broke. One boy was able to self-rescue because he was closer to shore. Me and my other friend were about 25 to 50 feet away from the dock. There was so much ice in between us. There was no way that anyone was going to get to us other than fire and rescue. From what the local paramedics have told me, and the firefighters that were on scene that day, that I was pushing one of the boy up to stay afloat, just so that the paramedics had an idea of where we were. I remember, a lot of people ask me what I remember and from that day, and there is quite a bit. I don't share a lot of it simply out of respect for the other 2 boys. And I'm very honest with that. That day was horrific. I mean, it's something I don't wish upon my worst enemy. But I do remember, the water line, how dirty the water was, how cold the hypothermia setting, and how it went from cold to hot. The hypothermia setting, and it felt like just my body was on fire. Like anything that touched me just burned. The best way I can describe that is if you've ever had a cat scratch you, just that real sharp pain. That was what it was like every time an ice pierced my skin. And then I remember it just going black. Tommy Shine with the Winspell Fire Department, he came out looking for me. He heard a voice saying, "Go 2 feet to his left." They had been looking for me for about 14 minutes. Now, a fact about this is that if your body is without oxygen for about a minute, there's a 99% chance you're not going to make it. At this point, I'm about 14 minutes. So he's looking for me. He hears this voice, and he sticks the pike pole, which is just a pole to tear drywall down in a fire. And he sticks it down, and he's like, "I got to find something. Like, this is do or die." And so he pulls up what he thinks is just like a piece of trash. And it's my white Lindenwood basketball camp shirt, and he found me. They rushed me to shore. They do some things there. And then the hospital was about, I'd say about 5 minutes away. So there they work on me for an additional 45 minutes, do everything medically and scientifically possible for me. There was no answer. They bring my mom in. My mom has no idea what's going on. Like, she really doesn't. She does what she does best, and she gets up to my feet and she just prays, screams to God, Holy Spirit, give me back my boy. Don't take my boy. Within seconds, I had a pulse. If you want to even more fact check it, there were 3 nurses that had their hands on me looking for a pulse. And the only person I want to bring up is Keith Terry. He's about 6'8", about 285. He's a big boy. I barely come up to his kneecaps. And he was on top of me looking for a pulse. And he says that when my mom prayed, something so powerful rushed up my body that it physically pushed him back. You know, it's just things like that we see that God did through this time. 14 days from the time, or the third day, 3 days after I had fallen through the ice, I woke up. 14 days from the time that I fell through the ice, I walked out of the hospital completely fine. 40 days from the time that I fell through the ice, I was released from all medical personnel. There is a movie called Breakthrough that goes into, it does a very good job. A lot of people ask me how accurate it is. I'd give it, it's about 97% accurate. You know, and if you want to go look up videos on how my mom portrays how it's not accurate, my mom would never doubt God. She wouldn't. You know, my mom, she is all for Christ and just being, you know, a witness for him, and she would never doubt God. And my mom and dad have never fought. In front of me, I think I've seen my mom argue once, and they never fought. And then Pastor Jason and my mom, they never had any battle at all. So
but they have to keep
they got to keep
drama.
They got to keep some things in there.
Yeah.
But Breakthrough is a good movie, and then Breakthrough is also a book that my mom wrote. And man, I'm not here to sell you books, but if you want to just hear more about my mom's testimony, what she went through, and I'm sure she shared some of it, but just getting to see, just to read it and witness what my mom has gone through and how God has brought everything full circle at the age of 70 it's truly amazing.
Oh yeah. I love your mom. She's my hero. And so you died.
Yeah.
You were without a heartbeat or a pulse for how long?
45 hour and 8 minutes clocked completely.
It's unbelievable, man.
They can't, and it's so unique because doctors are still looking for a case close to this, and they can't find one. I believe there's a lady in, don't quote me, I believe it's Switzerland, one of those northern countries over there, and she had a skiing accident and her head was only submerged. And I don't think it was for nearly as much time as mine was, and she was only 80% healed. There were some issues, whereas I'm 15 minutes and I'm completely % healed. Just walking around talking to you guys. So
during that 45, 50 minutes, do you see anything? Are you
floating in the hospital?
Are you at the top looking down like we always hear? Or
so a little bit about me, and I don't think a lot of people realize, is that I was not saved when I fell through the ice. So if I was to die, I'm very honest with people, I would be in hell. There was nothing that said God should have brought me to heaven. And so to answer your question, and I didn't deserve to see heaven. I wasn't saved. I wasn't, living a life for Christ. I had honestly gave God the number one sign, like you said. Like, I was just running away. I was so angry and going through so much internally that I didn't want anything to do with him. That's really the first and the major reason. The second reason is that they prayed that I wouldn't remember anything. And I think for knowing how I am personally and mentally and how I handle things, if I would remember any more than I do, it would be a much different outcome for me. Mm-hmm. I'm very hard on myself, and I think that would be very, very hard on me. And then the third reason is that we have a lot of stories to where people see heaven. And unfortunately, a lot of people want to embellish them, or they want to, make them more than what they are, not disclaiming them. I don't know the truth. I'm not them, and I'm not, God. But in this story, we see how science is brought into it, how it's defying all odds in science, how it's touching people, and more importantly, how people are seeing breakthroughs in their life, through this story. It's nothing that I did. It's nothing that my mom did, that Jason did, that any of these people did. they're experiencing Christ for the first time and experiencing these miracles in their own life. We've seen people healed, not just physically, but spiritually, but financially, just giving everything to him and then just experiencing all these benefits from it.
When you recovered, when did it dawn on you that I was dead, but I'm not anymore?
Mom and dad and Jason, and I've always, going back to how I was raised, it was always important to them, just no matter how good you were at something, to be humble. You're no better, you're no worse than the next guy. And I think for me to answer that question, like, when did I realize it? I still don't think sometimes I have. I really don't. I like to just have, I have a family barbecue with my friends. I like to be the average Joe. I like to go home to my son and wife, grill. I love, being in the gym, being active, watching sports, just being a down-to-earth guy. And so I think that's always been my take. Now, if you're friends with me, like really close friends with me, I'll joke about it, occasionally. But for the most part, I'm just John.
I'm sure your friends rip you every so often when you're walking by a park with a frozen lake.
Oh my Lord. They'll grab onto me and be like PTSD or something all the time.
And the humility, I think, it's extraordinary. I wonder, of course, you were younger. I mean, you were mid-teen. Mm-hmm. Some of us face life and death experiences. Some of us, like you, actually died. But I wonder how much that changes your day-to-day view. For example, I've had some businesses in very rough parts of town. And one occasion I was going into one of my offices and I was at a light. There was a Bronco next to me at the light and we were just waiting. And then all of a sudden, just flurry of gunshots all around and flying by my car into the Bronco. Well, it was a drive-by shooting and the person next to me unfortunately died and the car just slowly rolled into the middle of the street. And that was about as close to death as I had seen and I ever wanted to see. And in that moment, it continued to remind me day after day, you can be gone. You can be gone. In fact, arguably, every moment someone is having their unexpected last moment. Someone right now is having at the end of their life, the side of heaven, and it's unexpected. And so in that, I remember that this moment is the only moment that's guaranteed. And it helps me to maybe not sweat the small stuff so much and to appreciate every breath that I can take. It's not every moment that I do, but I wonder in your life, how has that impacted average John?
I love, how do I word this? For me, it's just waking up every day, kind of like you said, enjoying each breath, enjoying the people that I'm around. Like we were talking about earlier, we all get caught up in, the technology of the world. And I'm not going to lie, like I'm not the best at it. There's times that I get caught up in, the wormhole. And
are you a gamer?
Not anymore. Ever since I had my son, that is gone. I wish I still had time, but I think now it's prioritizing just being with my family. My family is older, like we talked about, and I'm not guaranteed those moments with them. My mom's going to be 72 this year, whereas my wife's mom's 40. So I'm going to have my mother-in-law around a lot more than my mom. And I love my mother. I love both of them. But it puts it into light of how valuable time is. Charles, my older brother, he always told me that time's a thief. And it is. I mean, it's the greatest thief there is. I mean, it just goes by so quick. And so for me being who I am, like I've experienced a lot of hard questions being who I am. I remember I took a friend to South Carolina on a trip. It was a small conference and I needed someone to help me with the book table. And I brought him and he's like, well, what am I going to expect? And I was like, to be honest, I have no idea. Every trip's different. My friend experienced every situation I've gone through. He experienced the glamour. They rented an SUV for us. He experienced, a little bit of the financial benefits. We did pretty well off that trip and he saw some of it because he got some because he went with me. Then he got into the hard stuff where a lady came up and said, I lost my husband and he didn't come back. Another lady came up to me and said, due to COVID, the doctors murdered my husband because of his age. Why you and not him? Why are you still here? What makes you better? And my friend is sitting there like he's seeing all of it. Like he's seeing the benefits, but he's also seeing the challenges. And so how I live out my life is I just make sure that people understand that I'm still a human as well, that I'm not any better, I'm not any worse. And the other thing is that Lazarus died in the Bible. Jesus died. I'm going to die. It's only, it's a matter of time. I'm not guaranteed eternal life. I'm not Jesus. And one thing I always bring up to their attention is if they were saved, I'm pretty sure they're pretty happy up there. Pretty sure they don't want to come back down here. I wouldn't want to come back down here. But for me, it just puts into perspective of enjoying time with my family, enjoying time with my son, my newborn son, and definitely giving glory where glory is due. I remember Devon Franklin before any of this started. He's the producer of the movie. He sat me down and he said, John, you are going to get fame. You are. You're going to get followers on social media. You're going to have girls wanting to talk to you. You're going to have XYZ. But I want you to remember this. He says, John, stay humble and stay hungry. Staying humble and remembering who you are. Staying hungry and chasing after every single thing the Lord has for you. Because remember, he's giving you this responsibility. And I promise you he can take it away just as quick. And for me, that is what I honestly live by every day. Yeah. Is staying humble and staying hungry. I'm in a different spot in my life now to where I'm being patient with where God has me. And I'm waiting for the next step, but I'm always staying hungry for what he has for me.
Yeah. Well, you're ahead of the game. I mean, I hate to use the words at your age, but for, an early 20-something, you got your head on pretty good. And I would imagine part of that is part of the tragedies and life experiences that you've had. And not to trivialize it, but and I would imagine it's a little like a sort of a Harry Potter-esque sort of life, right? The boy who lived, right? Why do others die when you live? And we don't really have an answer for that. All you can do is maybe share in someone's grieving, have empathy for them, right? This idea of, we would call this a bona fide miracle. This idea of miracles it's still a mystery to us. Because not everybody is healed. Joe, you've dealt with debilitating pain.
Yeah,
I'm sure lots and lots of prayers, including even to this day. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have easy answers, right? But we still trust. Do you find that people treat you differently?
No. If they know, well, I'll say when they first meet me, they do a little bit. But once they realize how down to earth I really am, then that kind of gets thrown out of the window. I remember when I was going to college and all these recruiters are trying to get me to go to their Christian school and they'd act so weird around me. And then they meet my mom and me and we'd be bickering at each other and, laughing at each other. And then they'd go back to the admin's office and they'd be like, they're the most down to earth people.
Right.
But for the most part, I'd say not really. They'll figure out who I am and be like, you didn't say anything. I'm like, well, yeah, I don't say a whole lot, but for the most part.
Few of us get a reminder, and you got it quite early in life, that we're all terminal, and definitely, anytime you're close to, you've been in a car accident or wherever you've had an experience where you could have died, it kind of makes you, take that breath like, whew, like I dodged that bullet. But we're all terminal. We're all heading there. Like there's no way around it. And the development of my Christianity throughout my life, and it is waxed and waned. I mean, as a teenager, I was all over the place. And I think the development of a Christian spirit is kind of like what makes that terminal life that you have livable. I mean, that makes you want to get up and do things and help other people. I would say that all comes from my Christianity. Mm-hmm. And you had like a very early reminder of, man, every minute counts. So when you look ahead in your life, do you have a vision of, I may not live to be 70, but if I do, this is where I'd want to be?
Very simple. I think the simple answer would be, I want to live in a home, watch my kids grow up and get old with my wife, and I want God to, when I go home, I want God to say, good job, my faithful servant. Now the more in-depth answer is taking as many people to heaven as I possibly can. Mm-hmm. And, kind of transferring into it it's, for a while, I felt like I was going to go into the immediate church setting and be that head pastor and worry about my congregation. The more I'm looking into it, the more I'm realizing I just can't. I can't afford, not that I can't afford to do it. I shouldn't do it. And I don't feel like the Lord is calling me to do it, because the target or the people that should be reached are not the people that are of older age. They should, don't get me wrong, they should. But I believe that the younger generations need more guidance and help in seeing what God has in store for their life than now, more important now than me just sitting in the four walls in my cozy little office, just chilling.
Now, when you say I want to bring, as many people to heaven with me as I can you define that a little bit more?
Living my life in a way where I impact others to find their plan and purpose within Christ, mm-hmm. finding God as their Savior, that He is their one true love. And if you seek Him, man, what the road He'll take you on, it won't be easy, but man, it's better than you can ever imagine.
So you've transitioned from the vision of pastoral work. What are some of the reasons for that? What are you seeing in the church? Where are we missing it?
Okay, so I can't say names, but just for instance, I mean, we talked about this. I was young. I mean, I still am young, so I'm constantly learning, and I'm trying to be very open-minded that I am learning. But my college decision, for one, I was roped into a college up in the northern states, and I went up there, and it just was, I was used for my name. It felt like I was used to bring in big names, and when I had to entertain people, I had to entertain people, and I had to go to lunches, I had to go to dinners, I had to just be someone. I wasn't being a kid, and I wasn't being poured into. I was more of, I need to be someone rather than learning. And so I was brought up with the decision. And so she was my fiance then, but we came home, and we just decided to come home. And a lot of situations happened up there. COVID happened, obviously, and then there was a couple of big incidents within the country, and a lot of racial tension at the time. And I looked at how this school handled that racial tension. I wasn't going to be a part of that. Not because I believe that I'm one side or the other. Don't hear that. It's more of the views behind what the school believed and how it was okay. We didn't do our research. We didn't get all the facts before we chose this path. We just went into this path with the opportunity of getting publicity, if that makes sense. And so I came home, and I just decided to come home, and then I was offered another school. I went to that school for the year, and I believe that God was starting to transition me into another path, and I just wasn't listening. I was being arrogant and like I knew all. And finally, after I went through that season of life, I came to the realization, and God really spoke to me just saying, John, are you going to do what I have for you? What I want you to do? Or are you going to do what other people think you should do?
Come on, man.
And I really was just like, okay. I just need to, slow my road, just slow my road and just listen and be obedient. And I love this one video I saw. He's like, I love nice things. Don't get me wrong. I like nice things like the rest. I love I like money. I like a nice car. I like, XYZ, whatever you want. But am I going to be complacent if God just has me here for the rest of my life? Am I going to be complacent with doing his will in this stage of my life? And I thought that was so powerful, because it's like, that is today. That is what we're missing. And that's where the youth, I believe, is going so wrong, is chasing after these earthly idols, these earthly forms of idols, of money, of wealth, of fancy cars, of fancy houses, which none of that's wrong. Don't get me wrong. And none of that's wrong. But I just believe that we've been given such a rotten image of what it really is about, and how that's going to create happiness, and how that's going to create false things that aren't going to bring you joy. And if you just listen to what God has for you and what he wants to do with your life, he can take you way farther than anything that you can ever imagine. And I'm seeing that firsthand, how God has brought my life from being a kid that was going down really the sex, drugs, and rock and roll life to this with a beautiful wife and a gorgeous son. I can't say it any different.
Yeah, man.
When we talk about material things, I always think this is, I always look back, because, I'm 50. So when I went out to play, there was no way to contact me as a kid. No one knew where you were when you went bike riding. I didn't have a phone. There was no internet. I mean, the first time I saw a computer, it was, the green wording. But today, advertisers have so many ways to, throw products and that into your face. And there's so many, back in the day, if you wanted to see a movie star or something, you had to go watch their movie. Now you just type in, whoever you like, you can find 1,000 stories about them. And there's a big influence with that, I think. When I came up, bands were grungy, torn T-shirts. Mm-hmm. Of course, they were millionaires, but like it wasn't put in your face that way.
If I heard one more Pearl Jam song out of your radio in the 90s.
Hey, I loved all that grunge in the 90s.
But you just couldn't understand them.
It just wasn't thrown in our face the way it is today. You can't turn on your computer without an advertisement or look at your phone. And now it's directed like at you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to overcome, I think, for a younger generation to not fall into that trap when it's just constantly in your face. I mean, would you agree with?
Oh, I would 100% agree. I tell whenever I'm in front of a youth audience, Sammy Rodriguez said it the best. You're not defined by the likes of many, you're defined by the love of one.
Yes.
I mean, just think about that. And that's honestly, in my view, where we've all gone wrong. We're not defined by Sharon's cousin's aunt's opinion on Facebook. We're not defined by how many likes we get on Instagram. And honestly, we're really not defined by the opinion we put on Twitter. We're defined by what God has for us and his plan for us. And I think we've just forgotten that. And don't get me wrong, I fell into the trap of it. I'm not going to get up here and ever say that I'm perfect. I'm not. But that you're right. It's 100% that. It's young women and women just being defined by their body, men being defined by the car they drive or the cool jewelry or the chain they have or what they're wearing or clothing or shoes, rather than just surrendering to Christ and what the image that he's made you. the love of one.
Well, and it actually is pretty practical, because I think it might have been Ken Blanchard in his book years and years ago, I think Lead Like Jesus, talked about pleasing many, and you're never, you please no one. Pleasing one God, your focus is crystal clear. Mm-hmm. But we run into problems because we are creatures of community. We seek approval. We seek to be included. In fact, I think it was the scholar James McGregor Burns that said the price we pay for inclusion is conformity, right? So we conform to societal and social norms so that we can be included in the flock or the group or the tribe, whatever you want to call it. And there's a strong sense, especially in today's culture, and we're talking about American culture, for the social media to be at the center of relationships, and in a way, false idols, because we can then make ourselves the false idol. And these are some deep, very, very sensitive topics we're moving into right now in terms of how we express our leadership and ultimately also our followership. And so many of us, I mean, and very few are exempt, let's say, right? But so many of us have been there too. I've been there, right? You put a post up and you get, 37 loves, whatever, 64 likes. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, wow, people accept me. They approve of me. It feels good. Endorphins start kicking in, right? Dopamine. What's my next post going to be like, right? But what does that really accomplish? And it's a tough question to answer if you're not being honest with yourself about seeking approval. And of course, then what does Jesus say? Not to seek man's approval, right? Just to seek approval of the Father. And of course, on the money, it's not necessarily and I'm glad you brought that up, because Jesus talks about money, and he doesn't say that the money is the root of all evil. He says the money is the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. And so that's where it becomes a false idol, because if I put money and the love of it before my love of God, my caring for my family, my obedience, then I have problems. And I've seen it. I mean, I've not only from the data, but more money there's not a correlation with greater levels of joy, satisfaction, happiness. It's not this curve that goes along the same curve. In fact, I've seen that I've worked in the financial services sector for almost 30 years. And I've seen folks that have slowly made more and more money, starting out very basic, middle class, and then moving into upper class. And I've found more often than not, people actually become more curmudgeon-y, more stressed, more just gripping tightly. To maintain it. Not necessarily, and there are some who are judicious, but many just live broader and bigger and larger lifestyles and still live just barely getting by. So it's not necessary, and I've found people who have very little means that live such a joyful and fruitful life. They're satisfied. Your satisfaction isn't going to come from the material. Your satisfaction is going to come from the spirit that you have in life, the spirit that you accept, the position and the perspective in life that you have. And if your perspective is, oh, I just one more dollar, or just one more like, or just one more of this, it's always going to be a chase. Mm-hmm. And the satisfaction is always fleeting. So that's the monologue.
So here's my great hypocrisy. We look at social medias and we can see all the damage that they can cause. But I think as dangerous as these microphones can be, they can also be very powerful and helpful. So I'm willing to, jump headfirst into that social media pit if I can reach people. And instead of giving them, these terrible messages or these things that you need, and kind of center them more, focus them on Christ, just a little move to just off center of the way that their life is going right now may change something huge down the line. So for everything, there is good and evil. Mm-hmm. I think you can make good and evil out of anything. I think social media is one of those things that can be really, really good. I mean, you can really have a fellowship. And of course, I want millions of people to listen to our podcast, because what are we talking about? We're talking about leadership through servitude, the way Christ told us to do it. Mm-hmm. So, if someone calls me a hypocrite for that, I don't care.
I mean, you're completely right. I mean, but I'm working on a lot of other things right now, going back into the ministry field. I didn't really take a break, but COVID happened. Travel wasn't as heavy. I was kind of not burnt out, but I'd done it for so many years that I just wanted to break. And so I've been living this, stereotypical American family life for a while, but I'm realizing that, okay, I need to start. So there's tools and there's things like you said, social media is a big tool. And my team and I, it's coming down to what makes us different. What separates, okay, you're wanting hypothetically a podcast. Okay. There's millions of podcasts out there about leadership, about business, about, what faith. But if we think about it, what is going to separate yourself and make you different, that you stand out in the faith? And one thing that I always thought of that was, I think would be a really unique idea is like we were talking about before we started, is us as Christians, we get a bad light because we're too judgmental. We're too hard. What if we tackled the hardest topics, and then as Christians, we answer them not as the church, but what the scripture says? Mind blown, right?
Right.
Mind blown. Because it's the simplest answer, but it's the answer that we are completely forgetting.
Which is the foundation of our ministry at Great Summit.
Exactly.
I mean, that is this podcast, we use it as a tool.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And this is our platform that we jump into the community. We bring that message of God into the community, and then we go out and serve others. So, it's my hope that one day, I'm out there and I'm, serving my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ in a physical way, helping them, bringing food where that's needed. And then that simple message that Jesus tells us, love one another. I mean, it's so simple, it's ridiculous, but we do get caught up in all the man rule kind of stuff. And it's in every religion, every religion starts to pack on all these ideologies that are not really keeping with scripture. Mm-mm. They're way off from that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is the foundation of Great Summit, which is the ministry that we will take from this platform.
And it's forward. Outward, the love God, love others, right? Love God, love people, like the greatest commandment, as Jesus talks about. That's where that humility comes in, because when Jesus was baptized by John, John said, he must increase, I must decrease. And it's this outward, serving others, it's so vulnerable. It's so outward that you say, I'm not going to be in this equation. I'm focused on helping you to become freer, wiser, more autonomous, healthier. Of course, there's a number of different aspects of become a servant yourself. And I think that there's such an attraction to that, because when I'm taking myself out of the equation, and we're just talking about just general leadership here, right? Because there's so much toxic and cancerous leadership in the world. We don't have to look far. We don't have to make arguments for it. Everyone listening likely has encountered cancerous, toxic, self-absorbed, narcissistic leadership. Gosh, I didn't even know what narcissism was until the last 4 or 5 years, and now it's like such a common term. Mm-hmm. And the antithesis of that is leadership that's not focused on self. It's not focused on self-preservation. It's focused on self-sacrifice. It's focused on improving and transforming. I love how you put it, right? It's not just about getting people in the door. It's about real life change, meaning, purpose, value. Because right now, people are questioning, especially post-pandemic, what is the purpose here? What is the meaning? Is there meaning? Or is it just a waste? Is there more to it? And the three of us in this room say, yes, exclamation point. There is more to it. And we can live in abundance even without all the extra stuff. That's a good place to be. Mm-hmm. But like you said, there's nothing wrong with having. In fact, my son, years ago, he said, Dad, can I ask you a question? He always would say, can I ask you a question? I always knew when he said, can I ask you a question? It was going to be like a deep question or something. I was like, okay, he's going to try and get me. So he says, Dad, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. He said, is it wrong to want to be rich? I mean, really rich, end quote. And of course, I chuckled. I don't know how old he was. Maybe he was about 10 or 11. And I said, son, no, it's not wrong. I said, but if you have that kind of wealth, that kind of resource that's been granted to you, then as followers of Christ, we have a responsibility to then use it to bless others and help each other along the way. So being really rich means you have a richness of opportunity to share. And that's just not money. That's everything else too. That's your countenance. That's the love that you share. So take it in so that you can turn around and give it away. So John, in your life, you're in a transition now where you've moved out of the idea of pastoral ministry, but ministry is really important to you. Mm-hmm. And where do you see the gap with, we see, okay, we have problems within the church. And even before we went live on air, we were talking about how the disconnect that we've had, especially during the pandemic, has fragmented people within the church. I mean, where do you see like the small church, the home church? Where do you see where we can start to turn the corner?
Start to turn the corner. For watching it, from, I've been to, I think by now 300 to 400, different types of churches around the country. I've been East Coast, I've been West Coast, I've been North, I've been South, I've been Midwest, mountain, different styles, different cultures, different views, different, just different completely how they handle things. You go to a Southern church, they're very hospitable. You go to a very Eastern, it's very city, very quick, they got the accent, it's go, 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 it's all different. And I think the disconnect that we're seeing and how to change it is, like we talked about, is we get back into just the Bible. And I know people say that all the time, is we just need to get back into the Bible. It's so simple. Part of my biggest problem, especially with the younger generation, is I feel like too many times kids are told and teenagers are told, don't have sex, don't do drugs. But it's never, here's why you don't have sex and you don't do drugs. Here's why it can harm you. Here's what the scripture says on why it's wrong, on why it's not good for you, on why it's not safe. Here's what God intended it to be. And we get so just don't do that. And then you get a curious mind, they get into it, and you never see them again. It's that fellowship. It's that accountability that we've lost as a church. I can get up on a stage and spit one-liners left and right. Like, I know them all. But like you said, it takes being generous, serving them, holding them accountable, loving them, being that pastor that is willing to, or being that leader that is willing to get down and dirty with them and not just stand up there. Okay, I'm up here, I'm getting off, I'm going to my office, see you next Sunday. And I think that's where we've lost a lot of it. And I'd argue a lot of it too is and you brought it up as well again, is we're not in the, we're not in the 1900s, we're not in the 2000s, we're in 2022. Times have changed. Methods of social media has changed. Everything has changed. How are we going to use this change for the glory of God? And we haven't done that yet either. I believe we haven't figured that out either. COVID did honestly completely change the whole format of the church. Like, live streaming is now very, very, very popular. Okay, it's very popular. Well, how are we going to get people back into the church now? How are we going to get people create fellowship? Is it creating small groups to where they go to homes and watching it together? Because I'm all for the church is not just the four walls in a building. The church is fellowship. That's my view. So how, it's just those different situations and things you see on what's going, not exactly wrong, but I think it's just adapting to the change that the world is having, and how are we going to reach generations to come and your children and your children's children if we haven't even figured out our children? And I think that's just where it comes down to. I was talking this with my wife the other night. I live, like I said, I grew up in St. Charles. It's predominantly, white area. Going to a private school, it was a predominantly white school. It was a challenge for me being Hispanic. And I looked at my wife and I was like, it's just weird because growing up here, I was always around that. But if I was in Fresno a couple weeks ago, you couldn't tell me one from the rest of them. Like, I'm just being honest. Like, I could have had a cousin there and I wouldn't have known. It's different everywhere. And how are we going to prepare our son for a world that is constantly changing and evolving so that I can, bend my knee to Christ one day and say, I did the best that I could in raising my son? And is God going to look at me and go, you did a good job? Did I prepare my son well enough one day that when he leaves my house that I know he's going to be all right? I know he's going to do good things. I know he's going to continue to live for Christ. It's just these questions, but I really feel like we've just steered off of the simplest answers. Just what are we going to do to glorify God in our everyday life?
Is acceptance a big key to bringing people to Christ now?
I would argue that it's not acceptance, but it's love. What do I mean by that? Scripture, Bible, we look at the LGBT community, we look at left, right, donkey, elephant, whatever view you want to go by, Biden, Trump, 2024, I don't know, rappers, Kardashians, Epstein, all these Trump, all these different situations, what is right and what is wrong? What is acceptance? Are we going to accept, both sexes in the bathroom? Are we going to accept, legalizing drugs? Are we going to acceptance? One thing that I've always stood for, and my mom, I found this weird, not weird, but I found that God was really working in my life, is because my mom, I don't know why, but she always attracts the people that live that different lifestyle of the LGBT community. She always loves them. Always. She's never gone up once to him and been like, that's a no-no. And in my religion, she's always loved them. And Jason, my pastor, was like, it's not my job to change them. And I think that's a big key is a lot of Christians, they try to change them. When in reality, we should love them and steer them into the scripture and what it says and ask questions and try and get to know them better. Too many times, let's be honest. If you were to look at, some people look at me, you're a 5'4" Hispanic, you should be mowing lawns. It's that stereotypical answer for me. Whereas it can grow really rough really quick rather than, okay, what's your name? How old are you? Where'd you go to high school? What do you like? Like baseball? Cool. Then, you build that relationship, and then you can then transform it into the word and then ask questions. And then a lot of times, more than not, guess what? Those people that are struggling with that have gone through way worse things in their life. And then a lot of times I hear as well, guess what? They've been hurt by the church themselves. We had a gentleman in an airplane. He said that he got outed in front of a AG, Assemblies of God Church. Completely outed. His parents had both passed away, and his aunt had passed away. And he completely walked away. Instead of loving him, we condemned him, and now he's never going to come back. So, and I know it's a lot of rambling to just say this. It's just, acceptance, love. In a world that is constantly changing, and quite frankly, I believe changing in a negative way, as Christians, how are we going to do it? Because standing and being, a patriot is cool and all, but is our job to be a patriot and, stand for red, white, and blue, or is our job to stand for Christ? And I really think that's what it comes down to. And I think Christians have gotten that confused. Because sure, the founding fathers found it, in Christ. I get that. But I think we're taking that too literally now. Way too literally.
For God so loved the world, not just
USA
or certain individuals, right? Mm-hmm. The world. I always hang on that. Because that's our mandate.
Yeah.
Is to love. John, I'm so glad you're here, man. I'm going to close this episode with a question that I ask most of our guests. One day you'll be on that great summit. You're the only guest I'll probably tell that you were actually over that great summit. But one day you'll be at the end of your life, and you'll look down and see all the things that you've done, all the people that you've touched. If you were to boil it down into one statement, what will you be thankful that people said about you?
I will be thankful that they saw that I lived my life for Christ. I loved my wife with my whole heart, and I raised a strong family in Him.
Well, you are on your way, my friend. Great to have you, John.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Joe, awesome wingman.
Thank you, sir.
Not Goose.
And no one wants to be Goose.
No one wants to be Goose. John, we got to have you back sometime, visit with us. We'd love to have you.
Anytime. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, my friend, thank you for joining me on this episode of A Call to Leadership. If you've been listening, you've probably heard me talk about our accounting and advisory business. And this show was actually born out of that business, those relationships. I found that entrepreneurs and professionals were missing. If you're in that place, do not despair. I'll leave how you can find us in the show notes.